All right, well, we are now past the halfway point. We hope that you're implementing something new. We hope that you're still preparing for class 5, watching this video, doing your workbook, and reading your chapter. Lesson 5, our focus of the fruit of the Spirit is gentleness, and our topic we are going to be talking about for this chapter is communication.
Communication. So communication is key. We hear from couples all the time. We work with the two issues mentioned, our communication and lack of connection. Communication is crucial to building connection, or it can fuel disconnection and harm the relationship.
So that's why we start this lesson on the workbook on page 51, actually talking about taming the tongue. And this is aimed at both parties, learning how a soft answer can turn away wrath, what the Gottmans call a gentle startup. But when years have gone by and there's not been a label or a reason of why we're struggling with communication either gets louder, shaming and blaming, communication breaks down, isn't happening at all, or communication comes down to logistics and survival mode just to get through the day.
Right, so it's mentioned in the book, but also on page 52 in the workbook is this key point. If one or both of you struggle to process verbal information or emotional information, a starting point could be incorporating visual aids, technology, written instructions, shared books, communication apps, or many other things are available.
So starting something new, a new tool, a new strategy, simply trying the old patterns and just hoping that they're going to work better, or he or she is finally going to understand me, if I could just explain it in a way that he or she will get it, then you wouldn't need any tools. So we need tools and we need strategies. We need to try new things to break old patterns to get to new solutions and better communication.
Right. So for everyone to consider, regardless of your neurotype, on page 53, how are you doing at gentle and grace-filled communication? And this is both as a giver of communication and a receiver of communication. We found this definition of gentleness, the quality or characteristic of being kind, tender, mild-mannered, compassionate, and considerate, showing love and care for others in how you act in speech. Do you have a gentle spirit? I'll also add maybe a non-anxious presence to that.
Right. I don't think either neurotype gets a pass on being gentle. It's one of the fruits of the Spirit. Now, wives, I already know what you're thinking because I've talked with many of you about this. I hear this all the time. Dr. Stephanie, I have said it nice, kind, or gentle 3 or 4 times before I lose my cool and react. And all they remember is that I reacted. But I can tell you, my spouse only responds when I lose my mind and go ballistic. It's like now they know I'm being serious because I mean it. So it's like working with a teenager who's defiant and finally gives in. And this does not really feel like partnering or teamwork at all. I feel like I have to be stern or mean to get things done. So we have to change this because there's a cycle or training. If you are the neurodivergent partner and your spouse has tried to say it nice and kind to you and you only react or respond to the mean, the stern, the reaction, you are training their brain that is what it takes to get your attention. So we're going to change the cycle. It's not a big deal unless she loses it with me. Okay?
That's how I know it's important.
That's how I know it's important. But that's not healthy, and that's eroding your relationship. It might get the task done, but you're eroding the relationship. So to change the cycle means you need to sit down and reflect. So you can go back to chapter 6 on boundaries, on what Barbara Grant calls the love sandwich. You can state a boundary, you can state a need, you can state a hurt in a way that is loving and kind and direct, focused on working together. It's like, I need you to take my thoughts and suggestions seriously because I don't want to lose my temper or react in an uncalled way. So what is a signal, a code, technology, visual aids, whatever we can do to break the cycle? We've got to stop the I have to lose my mind to get a reaction, because sometimes I'll lose my mind and my partner runs away and hides too, or it escalates. So we got to figure out a way to stop the cycle. We have that SOAP process for you again, and so this time your scriptures will be focusing on gentleness.
Also, to go along with that, if it's ever been suggested to you that you dismiss me, you don't respect me, you don't consider my thoughts, my feelings, my asks, or my wants, perhaps that is the source of it. You're not acting until things have escalated to anger. Right? And now the gentle ask was dismissed. The gentle ask was rebutted. The gentle ask was, that's not important to me. You stayed silent. Right? That's, if you hear those things, there's a correction mechanism.
Right.
So let's look into chapter 7. We've already started with the fruit to cultivate is gentleness, and now the understanding that communication between two people in a neurodiverse marriage is difficult at times, complex and layered. We validate that it's hard, and we advocate this is why you will need a new understanding, more gentleness, and new tools.
Scripture tells us that the tongue is hard to tame, and it has the power to build up or destroy, which it confuses me why people don't think that verbal abuse is very damaging.
Right.
When so much
Life
of the
and death
scripture
is in the power of the tongue.
Absolutely. Communication has several purposes for the neurotypical partner. Communication is vital. It is the key for connection. So if you're like, what does she mean we don't connect? Part of connection is communication. For the neurodivergent partner, communication can be about transferring information, completing a transaction, downloading information about a passionate interest, planning something, logistics. So we respect that there are differences in communication. We don't say one is right or one is wrong, but one is more connecting and one is less connecting. So not every interaction between two people is going to be connecting. Sometimes you got to get things done and it's about the logistics. But you can even have logistical communication in a relational way,
Right.
Even if the communication isn't connecting. How we interact and do it could be relational.
I think there's a blog post on the levels of connection or something like that. So there's connection.
I think we're going to talk about it today.
Is more than, right? It's
Right.
more than just the exchange of information. There's more going on there. So language is explained in the book, and it's articulated that it's more than the actual words we use and their meaning. It's how they're articulated, the fluency of voice, that could be the tone, the volume, things like that. It includes the syntax, how the sentence is structured, semantics and pragmatic. Semantics being the definition, the meaning of the word, both the literal meaning and its inferred or maybe slang form of it, and the pragmatics of it. Just how does it operate in the sentence. Our youngest daughter, Erica, is a teacher in the public school system, and she teaches English as a second language. And in school and in one of her majors was TESOL, so teaching English as a second language, and she has a minor in linguistics.
She was home from school one weekend. We were walking, and she was discussing how difficult it can be for English language learners, not only to learn what the word means, the vocabulary, but how to use it, how to emphasize certain parts, when to use maybe formal or informal. Maybe you use this word in a certain situation and not a situation. And the social context is very important, and the semantics and syntax is only a part of it. Dan pipes up and he says, oh, I don't get all of that a lot of times. No wonder there's communication misfiring in the couple's work that we do, because social context is key, and inferences and assumptions that are being made based on past communications are part of where those misfires are. So this is so important to understand. One of the challenges in the autistic brain is the semantics and pragmatics and social context of communication.
So I was in this is just recently,
Mm-hmm.
we were in a podcast, recording a podcast with Doctors Mary and Dr. Jones, Dr. Jeff Jones. They're both doctors. Mary is a pediatrician and Jeff is an ER doctor. And I asked Jeff during that conversation, when I say ER doctor, he ran the ER department.
Right.
So, and he had been doing that for a long time. He wasn't just an attending doctor or anything like that. He ran the ER doctor. You're working in the ER, you see a lot of things. And so I asked him, Jeff, working in the ER every day versus coming home from work and interacting and trying to be part of the family, inserting yourself into that environment, which is more stressful. And without hesitation, he said, trying to communicate and to know when and how at home is far more stressful than the ER at work. At work, there is a flow, protocols, problem I can solve effortlessly. At home, it stresses and the effort is greater. So it's interesting that here you go, you got a guy that's, pretty brilliant, pretty smart, and the thing that is easier, counterintuitively from our perspective, being in the ER is less stressful because there is a set of rules. Somebody comes in, their arm's falling off, well, what do? You stabilize and put their arm back on, right? There's probably a lot of stuff in between that. But it's not that nebulous situation of, I don't know where everybody is or what everybody's got going on. I don't know how to engage really in any of this. It's a much different environment mentally, even though from the outside looking in, going home, you know, we're all taught in picture perfect TV and Christian circles that going home is easier. And here is a real life situation for that to be.
It's not always the case. Like for me, it stressed me out working in the ER. To come home would be safe and it would be peace and it would be like, oh, after the long ER day. But that was not his experience.
Right. And so it really was. And because of that, Jeff spent a lot more time at work.
Because that's where he felt confident.
Right. He would volunteer for shifts and things like that because that was his confidence level. He comes home, his confidence goes from like, I don't know, big to little really fast. And he felt just incapable of connecting or engaging correctly, regardless of the situation.
Despite his brilliance. And ability to talk to multiple people at one time in an ER.
Right.
So I guess we wanted the NT spouse to hear that it isn't always a willingness issue. It sometimes can be stress, a not knowing.
Right.
So that's why there's got to be practice and grace and gentleness. And then there also needs to be an acknowledgement of that from the neurodivergent person, that if this is stressful or I don't know how, I desire to communicate with you, but I don't know how, admit that and get yourself a coach and work on that communication skill.
Right.
So I wrote a blog on understanding neurotypical communication, because usually I'm writing so much about understanding autistic communication, but in the realm of the relationships that we work with, so much attention is given to understanding and accommodating the neurodivergent individual. And usually by the time wives have reached out, they've read just about as much as I have. Well, I did do a dissertation on it. So before I did a dissertation on it, they have read all of these things and read blogs and listened to most of our podcast. And it's equally vital, if you are neurodivergent, to grasp the communication style and needs of your non-autistic partner. Building mutual understanding and empathy forms the cornerstone of any successful relationship, regardless of your neurotype. Many non-autistic spouses have read books, done the podcast, done the thing. How do I understand? How do I say this better? How can I say this in a way that he won't dysregulate? How do I approach? How do I say this to him? But there's not that reciprocity of, how do I better understand my wife? How do I understand her emotional language? How do I help her, support her when she's having an emotional need? So the entire blog is there on our website at the www.christianneurodiversemarriage.com. Go to blog. It's a 2-part series called Understanding My Neurotypical Spouse's Communication. But you have to have some talks about what is meaningful to your spouse. Recognizing that just because you don't have a need to chat or talk or connect or talk for the sake of talking, your talking is more about achieving a task or getting a thing done. Those of us who are not autistic, that is part of what communication is for. So we need mutual understanding. So back to double empathy, which we talked about way back in the first lesson. You have different communication needs. You have different communication preferences and styles and emotional needs. Many people on the spectrum can also see questions. I hear this all the time. It's the Great Inquisition. They're constantly asking me questions. But neurotypicals use questions to connect and to ask. There's certainly a way to do it, because sometimes when we're teaching the neurodivergent partner how to do it, they may start asking questions like a cross-examination. So questions are about curiosity, but it's how people seek information, and you can do it in a relational connecting style or a disconnecting cross-examination lawyering style.
So for the AS spouse, the one on the spectrum, questions can be perceived as judgment, pushback, but have the understanding that's how you use these questions can be connecting or disconnecting. a relational curiosity, not just factual curiosity.
More than information. We're not trying to suck the information.
What's important?
Out.
What's valuable to that person right now, instead of what am I interested in about this situation? You'll get a lot more from a connectivity perspective. There is a book available called What to Say Next to build the skill, and a book called I Hear You to work on validation and listening. In the chapter, you'll see how Greg, in this chapter we're in right now, chapter 7, you'll see how Greg processes a lot in his head and can have a single focus, and Carol processes verbally and asks questions for understanding, and connection is not intended there to be argumentative.
Not to be argumentative or critical.
It's in that situation really just how the two of them, they work.
Right, and understanding that, again, it's about having those conversations and understanding what's going on and what's missing, and learning to ask the question or say, hey, are you sure we're on the same page? Or when you said this, I thought you meant that. Is that accurate? Even stopping and pausing for those little things, it's better to ask to make sure I'm clear. And then it's a frustrating thing for me when I'm working with neurodivergent men and I'm asking a question like, how would you think I would say that? How would you think I would mean that? I'm not even going to answer that. I'm so offended. It's like, I'm trying to get information from you. I don't know how to get information from you unless I ask a question. So if I'm misunderstanding, I'm inviting you in to tell me about that misunderstanding. And let's practice how to do that, so you can practice how to do that with your spouse. The book talks about 3 measures of the communication difficulties, because many times people say, oh, all couples go through that. All couples have communication issues. But Carol breaks it down into intensity, duration, and frequency. So how frequently are you arguing? How long, or what is the duration of it? And then how intense can it get, and how quickly can it get intense? Now, some of you have the opposite problem, like you're not talking at all. But if you're constantly in this negative cycle, these are the things that we're looking at. And so while getting your intensity, duration, and frequency changed still doesn't mean you're going to be more connected, but we got to get conflict down before we can move into connection. So just start with one metric and try to change it. Intensity can be worked on with gentleness. Now you might be saying, Dr. Stephanie, he doesn't even talk to me. He isolates himself. I would almost prefer to argue than to live in this deafening and painful silence. So let's change that discussion from arguing to communication. We maybe need more duration then. We need more frequency. So if you're communicating infrequently, then we can work on increasing that to frequency. So these are the 3 things. Again, there's 3 metrics here. Just pick one thing. What are we going to lower or increase as we're trying to work on these new skills together?
Right. So take a look at your communication patterns. I think it's pretty easy to know if you're loud.
Well,
Usually.
But each person can think loud is different.
Right. But I think you know when you yell.
We would hope so. But Sydney used to accuse me of yelling all the time.
Yeah, but I think when you yell, the other person probably believes it too. So if you recognize that in yourself, then you get an opportunity to step back and understand what was going on here. And that's really what we're after, is you can't always predict what someone else is going to perceive you as, but when you recognize it in you.
Right, so there's got to be self-awareness and self-reflection.
There's and sometimes you don't even have to hear it. Maybe you just recognize a face of, fright or something like that. There is an environment you can take influence from that points you there. But when you see that kind of thing, pay attention, be observant in those things. Come back, slow down, recognize. If you need to apologize for being loud or whatever it was. And then if you're not talking, start. Right. If you're not engaged in the activities of the house, people are going to ball or dance or swimming or whatever it is, and you're at home doing whatever, there's a great opportunity to get involved. Communication doesn't necessarily have to mean we're talking. It could be participating. Maybe that's your on-ramp. Maybe participating silently is your on-ramp.
Engagement.
Right? You didn't go to swimming, or you didn't go to gymnastics or ball or whatever it was, and now you are. Right? That is a communication all by itself. And then you've got an opportunity after that event to have a conversation. Now you've got things you observed to talk about. And, that's a great thing. So use your environment, use those things, and, think about it. When you get back to you're at home, think about the way that played out, and if you played it well, what other questions could you have asked, and things like that.
And as we get into the next chapter, what Dana's talking about is metacognition. You need to learn to think about what you're thinking about. Think about and plan what you're going to do and what you're going to say. So that's one of the features of executive function, which kind of plays into some of our social communication differences. If you're not thinking about or planning how to engage or how to be intentional, or what am I doing and how am I feeling in this moment and how might I be perceived, that's all part of executive function. So changing our communication patterns is going to be challenging, but it can be done because systems like homeostasis and keeping things the way that they are, even if it's not helpful. Homeostasis, this has a weird comfort to it, even if it's negative, because it's predictable.
Right.
And also it takes a pain point to make a change, and often not both people are in the same pain point. The way that the world works might work for one person, but it's not working for the other spouse. And so it's harder to get buy-in for the person who's fine with the way things are. But the person who's in pain is ready for change to be now, but it's going to take time to change those patterns.
I think we've all seen the catastrophes of a train plowing through an intersection and there being some kind of vehicle on it. Maybe it was on a hill and a tractor trailer got stuck there because it grounded itself, and then you see it go through this trailer or whatever it was. The train could have seen it coming from a long ways off, but a locomotive that big with that much mass, with that much velocity, has a momentum that is very difficult to stop. And if you consider it from even in motion, to stop that and go the other direction takes an enormous amount of energy, right? I've got to slow all the way down, got to come to a complete stop. Anybody that's ever really done much of anything, knowing from going from stop to moving is harder than going from moving to moving, right? That tendency to be at rest and stay there takes some more effort. So you got to go all the way to stop, and then you got to start moving the other direction. And using that idea of this is a large mass moving at a velocity that you've got to slow it down, stop it, and then redirect, and then build up that same amount of velocity that you had before. This is not, days.
Right.
It's not
and
weeks.
So,
it's not, this is non-trivial.
If there's the mass and the speed of changing things, there's also, if you think about, if you've ever tried to learn another language, usually Spanish here in the States might be something, it can take years to master a new language. Usually in Spanish 1, you get the vocabulary, you get some words, you learn a little bit of conjugation and how a sentence structure might be different. But it's going to take a while to be able to use it in conversation, especially with a native speaker of that language. And if you step back and say, I need to learn an autistic language, and the autistic person needs to learn some neurotypical language, we've got to give each other some time. By definition, this is going to be months to possibly years to get a new pattern down. So we have a few podcasts about language. Communication is probably the thing we talk about the most. In our catalog of podcasts, this topic has a lot of airtime. So remember to finish after finished class coaching on page 58, any insights that you got from class members or your coaching. Maybe you have a new hindsight, a new direction, something new to try.
Oh, and don't forget to make a goal after every one of these. What is the thing that, I intend to make X kind of change? Because when you get done, you've got 8 different goals, right? There's 8 different sections. You've got 8 different goals. It's a small checklist. You can do some of those during any part of the week, and then after a period of time you're much better at 8 things.
All right, that's it.
Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.